Welcome to BeFM Drama, where we turn great works of English literature into gripping radio plays. I'm Joshua Cornwell, and I'm the host of this program. This week, we'll be bringing you our adaptation of The Greek Interpreter, a classic Sherlock Holmes mystery by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, best known for introducing readers to the character of Mycroft Holmes, the iconic detective's brilliant, if deeply lazy, older brother. In this tale, Mycroft proves to be the source of the case which the brilliant Sherlock Holmes finds himself investigating. So now, please join me as I take the role of Dr. John Watson, Sherlock Holmes' close friend and chronicler, and the narrator of our story today. This is BeFM Drama, and we're excited to present the first episode in our 5-part adaptation of this classic story. During my long and intimate acquaintance with Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I had never heard him refer to his relatives, and almost never to his own early life. This reluctance on his part had increased the somewhat inhuman impression he sometimes produced upon me, so much so that I occasionally found myself thinking of him as some kind of weird, isolated phenomena, a brain without a heart, just as deficient in human sympathy as he was extraordinary in intelligence. His aversion to women and dislike of forming new friendships were both typical of his unemotional character, but not more so than his complete suppression of every reference to his own family. I had almost convinced myself that he was an orphan with no living relatives, when one day, to my very great surprise, he started to talk with me about his brother. It was after tea one summer evening, and the conversation, which had moved in a half-hearted, random fashion, from golf clubs to politics to the peculiarities of the Earth's rotation on its axis, came around at last to the question of human aptitude. The point under discussion was how much any special gift or talent in an individual was based on his ancestry, and how much on his own early training and education. I remember exactly what I was saying to Holmes at the moment the conversation turned to his family. In your own case, from all that you've told me, it seems obvious that your powers of observation and your peculiar skill at deduction are based on your own careful and systematic training.
Yes, to some extent. My ancestors were country squires, and they appear to have led fairly normal lives, much the same as any others in their class. I believe my pull toward observation and deduction may have come from my grandmother, who was the sister of Vernet, the French artist, and, by all accounts, a powerfully talented painter herself. An artistic streak in the blood can manifest itself in the strangest forms.
But why do you believe that your skill is hereditary?
Because my brother Mycroft possesses it in a greater degree than I do.
You have a brother? This is news to me indeed. But if there is another man with such incredible powers in England, why is it that neither the police or the public have heard of him? Surely you are just being modest. Holmes laughed at my suggestion.
My dear Watson, I cannot agree with people who consider modesty a virtue. I strive to be a logician in all things, and a logician should see all things exactly as they are. To underestimate one's own abilities is as much to part from the truth as it is to exaggerate one's own powers. When I say Mycroft has better powers of observation than I do, you better believe that I am telling you the exact and literal truth.
Is he younger than you?
No, 7 years older.
And how is it possible that he is unknown?
Oh, he is very well known in his own circle.
And where is that, then?
Well, in the Diogenes Club, for example.
I had never heard of this institution, and my face must have proclaimed as much, for Sherlock Holmes pulled out his watch.
The Diogenes Club is the oddest club in London, and Mycroft is one of the oddest men. He's always there from 5:15 to 8:20. It's 6 now, so if you'd like to go for a stroll on this beautiful evening, I would be very happy to introduce you to these two oddities, the club and my brother.
5 minutes later, we were in the street, walking towards Regent's Circus.
You wonder why it is that Mycroft doesn't use his powers for detective work. The answer is that he is incapable of it.
But I thought you said...
I said he was superior to me in observation and deduction. If the art of being a detective started and ending with reasoning from a comfortable armchair, my brother would be the greatest criminal investigator that ever lived. But he has no ambition.
No ambition?
No energy either. He won't go out of his way to verify his own solutions. He'd rather people thought him wrong than take the trouble to prove himself right. Again and again, I have taken my problems to him, and he's given me explanations that have afterward proven to be correct. And yet he's absolutely incapable of working out the tedious practical details that must be resolved before a case is fit to be laid before a judge or jury with any hope that it will be won on evidence.
Deduction is not his profession, then?
Hardly. What is to me a source of livelihood is to him the merest hobby of an idle enthusiast. He has an extraordinary mind for mathematics and audits the books for several of the more interesting departments of the British government. Mycroft lives in Pall Mall, and he walks around the corner to the ministries of Whitehall every morning and back home every evening. Year after year, he takes no other form of exercise and is seen nowhere else except the Diogenes Club, which is just across the street from his apartment.
I've never heard of that name before, the Diogenes Club, and I thought myself well up on the London clubs.
I'm not surprised you haven't heard of it. There are many men in London, you know, who, some from shyness, some from hatred of other men, have no wish for the company of their fellow humans, and yet they have no hostility towards comfortable chairs in the latest magazines. It is for the sake of people such as these that the Diogenes Club was founded. No member is permitted to take any notice of any other one. Except in the strangers' room, no talking is allowed under any circumstances. And 3 strikes, if brought to the notice of the committee, are cause for the talker to be thrown out. My brother was one of the founders. I admit that I find it a very soothing environment.
We had reached Pall Mall as we talked, and were walking down it from the St. James End. Sherlock Holmes stopped at a door some little distance from the Carlton Hotel and turned to face me with a finger on his lips.
Shh. If you say a word at all inside before we reach the stranger's room, it will reflect badly on me, and I'll not have my honorary membership threatened, even by you, Doctor.
As we stepped through the glass-paneled door, I caught a glimpse of a large and luxurious room, in which a number of men were sitting about and reading papers, each in his own private nook. Holmes led me into a small room which looked out from wide windows over Pall Mall. I waited a minute before Holmes returned with a companion I knew could only be his brother. Mycroft Holmes was a much larger man than Sherlock. I'm being too kind. In truth, his body was absolutely corpulent. But his face, massive as it was, preserved some of the sharpness and intelligence of expression that was so remarkable in his younger brother. His eyes, which were peculiarly light, watery gray, seemed to always retain that far-away, introspective look which I only observed in Sherlock when he was exerting his full powers. He reached out a broad, fat hand like the flipper of a seal and wrapped it around my own in a soft, welcoming handshake.
I'm glad to meet you, sir. I've heard of Sherlock everywhere since you became his chronicler. By the way, Sherlock, I expected to see you last week. I thought you might consult me over that manor house business. I feared you might be a little out of your depth.
No, I solved it.
It was Adams, of course.
Yes, it was Adams.
I was sure of it from the first moment I heard of the case.
The brothers sat down together in front of the wide glass windows that looked out onto the street.
To anyone who wishes to study mankind, this is the spot. Look at the manifold, magnificent types of humanity. Look at these 2 men coming towards us, for example.
The billiard shark and the other?
Precisely. What do you make of the other?
The 2 men had stopped outside the window. Some chalk marks on the waistcoat pocket were the only signs of billiards, which I could see on one of them. The other was a very small, dark man, with his hat pushed back on his forehead and several packages under his arm.
An old soldier, I perceive.
And very recently discharged.
Served in India, I see.
And a non-commissioned officer.
Royal Artillery, I fancy.
And a widower.
But with a child.
Children, my dear boy. Children.
I couldn't help laughing. Come on, this is a little bit too much. You're having me on, aren't you?
Surely it is not hard to say that a man with that bearing expression of authority and sun-baked skin is a soldier, is more than a private, and is not long from India.
That he has not left the service long is shown by his still wearing his ammunition boots, as they are called.
He had not the cavalry stride, but he wore his hat on one side, as is shown by the lighter skin of that side of his head. His weight is against him being a sapper, ergo, he is in the artillery.
Then, of course, his mourning attitude shows that he has lost someone very dear. The fact that he is doing his own shopping looks as though if it were his wife. He has been buying things for children, you see. There's a rattle, which shows one of them is very young. The wife probably died in childbirth. The fact that he has a picture book under his arm shows that there is another child to be thought of, a little older.
I began to understand what my friend meant when he said that his brother possessed even keener faculties than him. Sherlock glanced over at me and smiled. Mycroft took snuff from a tortoise-shell box and brushed away the wandering grains from his coat front with a large red silk handkerchief.
By the way, Sherlock, I've just come across something quite after your own heart. A genuinely odd problem submitted to my judgment. I really don't have the energy to follow it up, except in a very incomplete fashion, but it's given me the opportunity for some very pleasing speculation. If you would care to hear the details...
My dear Mycroft, I should be delighted.
And we'll hear all that Mycroft Holmes, Sherlock Holmes's remarkable older brother, has to say about the strange case that has crossed his path tomorrow. I'm your host, Joshua Cornwell, and I'll hope that you'll join us again soon for more BeFM Drama.